if you're interested in counting money, this paper will be for you. No doubt, this paper is for the above average student. Find out why in today's episode of PPR. Alright, welcome back to another video. This is Yao from Vantage Tutor, a class above the rest, and for today's Prelim Paper review, it's for the E Math students. It is from 2023 Crescent Girls School E Math Paper 2. Now before I go into the details, these are the questions that I feel are insightful and probably worth your time to try. And for students who like to try this paper, you're invited to join my Telegram channel where I've uploaded a summary along with a download link available on my blog. Have a go at it, let me know how you did. Firstly, this paper, I don't know what to feel about it actually. I'm having mixed feelings about it. Why? Let's find out via my 3 matrices. Number 1, relevance. Number 2, insightfulness. Number 3, difficulty. Before I give an overall score, I recommend to you the type of students who should try this paper. And of course, if I had a student who had to sit for this paper under exam condition, what would be a fair expectation of her from me in order for her to score an A in her actual O-levels? Firstly, relevance. As you look through the paper, more or less what you expect, at least from afar. A lot of the questions here, you may have encountered them mainly in prelim papers and maybe not so much in your O-levels. Because generally in the O-levels, there are not so many traps in there that you can see even from afar. In fact, O-levels, there are hardly any traps. But the questions in this paper, the shorter the questions are, the more tricky it is. But usually in O-levels, the shorter the questions are, the more direct they are. Beyond that, the flow of the question, the contextual question at the back is nothing too far-fetched. You see it and you feel that, you know what, that could happen. And really, there really isn't much for me to say about the relevance. A simple 7.5 out of 10. Next, insightfulness. Putting all the small booby traps aside, putting all the short questions with little details in there aside, this paper, there are some learning points. And these learning points are not necessarily unforeseen to you. You have seen them before, and when you go through this question, it may have a small twist, something slightly more, but you can probably figure it out either through experience or learning on the spot. Much of the insightfulness of this paper comes from the contextual end of the paper. Because if you talk about shapes and all that, vectors, triangles, I bet most of you are rather familiar. Even though they may seem different, it would just act as a small reminder for you. But for the contextual question, it really feels like an overload of information. I get intimidated just by looking at it. And another strength of this paper in terms of insights is the explanation they ask of you in the stats part, in some other minor parts of the question. And that in itself is rather creative. Maybe it's just to me because I had not seen a similar question to this, but if you can explain them rather well, maybe you are indeed a class above the rest already. And hence, the insightfulness of this paper will be given a rather high score, 7.5 out of 10. Next, difficulty. Upon first impression, nothing about the paper scares me. But if you look a bit closer at the details, when you talk about the negative sign, you talk about numbers asked of you, you talk about the skills required as you solve the question, it is a bit difficult. In fact, if you look at some of the shapes, the simpler they look, the more complicated they are to actually solve it, because you have limited information. And that is precisely the case in some of the questions in here. Beyond that, there's also explanation, and these explanation questions, I think there's one that you would have seen in other places, but for the stats part, it really is very refreshing for me to see. And maybe that would be a challenge for a lot of students here. Apart from that, the information presented to you is not too much except for the contextual question. And time management, I will foresee not being too big of an issue. Most of you should be able to complete on time, but I don't see many of you completing ahead of time. Because again, I feel the difficulty of the paper lies in mainly the last couple of questions. And hence, the difficulty of this paper will be given a very respectable 7.5 out of 10. Overall, a rather refreshing paper. And that's not something easy for me to say in terms of E-Math, because generally E-Math papers, they do not go too creative, but this paper was kind of ahead of its time. It's creative in areas that you do not expect, and in fact the parts that you did not expect to be creative it came out almost the exact same question in the last year O-level, which is the asymptote question, the graph plotting question. And as I've said, there are explanations required of you in this paper that you may or may not have seen in other papers. Especially for the stats, it's a breath of fresh air. Overall, this paper does not present you with too much information, and for some questions, they really do not provide you with any information, and that's what makes this paper more challenging than usual. It's not that you have to decipher information, but rather you need to look for information when you don't have any. And therefore, I think this paper presents rather unique challenge, a rather unique practice to most students, and therefore this paper will rank as one of my favorite papers. Easily 7.5 out of 10. And if I had a student who had to sit for this paper under exam condition, a fair expectation of her from me would be 65% in order for her to score an A in her actual O-levels. Finally, who would I recommend this paper to? I recommend this paper to every student out there who's looking to try something a bit different, especially in terms of stats. And this is not the only group of students that I will recommend. In fact, other groups of students, for example those who have started on the 10-year series and still wanted something that is similar to the 10-year series so that you can practice, this paper could also be for you. And mainly, this paper should be used as a time practice. It's going to give you a good sense of your time management, which is the biggest strength of this paper. I feel that this paper's strength lies in the fact that some of the questions are creative, some are routine, and in the short questions, you need to take note of your workings to minimize careless mistake. And therefore, a lot of you would have taken more time than you usually would have done, but at the same time, you should be able to finish this paper on time at the very bare minimum. And hence, if you are a student looking for a time practice, if you are a student looking for a paper that has some small twist in it, such that there are still learning points for you to extract from, this paper could be for you. Alright, so we have come to the end of this Prelim Paper review of 2023 Crescent Girls School E Math Paper 2. Now, if you like what I'm doing, follow me on TikTok, like my video, comment, and share it with your friends. I'm sure this will help them, because ultimately, I'm on my way to 10,000 followers. And for the students who like to try this paper, you are invited to join my Telegram channel where I've uploaded a summary along with a download link on my blog. Have a go at it, let me know how you did. Nothing else. This is your love from Vantage Tutor, a class above the rest. Take care.